Howdy, it's Kyle with a video talking about the 10 best national parks for a one-day visit. If you're on a road trip and you want to see national parks, but you have a very limited amount of time, there are certain national parks that are much more suited to a short visit than others. Some are just huge and deep and expansive and you really can't see a whole lot in just one day, but others, like the ones I'm going to talk about in this video, are pretty well suited for a short visit. I'm going to start in my favorite state for outdoor adventure, and that's Utah. And the first national park I'm going to mention is Bryce Canyon. Bryce Canyon is a great park for a one-day visit. You can see a whole lot in a short amount of time. Similarly to the Grand Canyon, you'll go to the visitor center and drive the main road through the park, stopping at some of the viewpoints to get some really good pictures. What makes Bryce Canyon different than the Grand Canyon is that there are short hikes you can take just off the main road where you can see quite a bit of the canyon without having to go way down into it. For example, there's a Navajo Loop Trail, which is less than 2 miles, and it is kind of steep, but it isn't that strenuous when it's only 1.5 miles. But there are other short hikes that are worth doing at Bryce. So as you drive the main road through the park, it's a north-south road, so at the south end of the road is the south end of the park, and it ends at a spot called Rainbow Point. It's a beautiful point to stop, and there's some nice vistas there, but there's also a couple of short trails you can take from that spot. So again, you can do a short hike without having to go way into the canyon and spend the entire day just getting to the bottom. So between driving the main road through the park, stopping at the visitor center and some of the main vista points, and doing a couple of short, less than 2 mile hikes, you can see quite a bit of Bryce Canyon in just one day, which makes it one of the best national parks for a short visit. Staying in Utah, a few hours northeast of Bryce Canyon is Arches National Park. This one's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum that I think you can really see all you need to see in Arches in just one day, and there really isn't a whole lot to do if you're going to stay there for multiple days, so it is a great park for just one-day visits. When people think of Arches, the first thing most people are going to think about is Delicate Arch. It's a well-known site. It's one of the most recognizable outdoor spots in the entire country. But the combination of Arches National Park being very busy, Delicate Arch being very recognizable, and the hike to it not being that difficult, it's a very crowded place to be if you go in the middle of the day. What I always recommend people to do if they're going to Arches is to get to the Delicate Arch trailhead first thing in the morning. So get to the park before sunrise. It won't take you very long to get through the park to the trailhead, and you can get on the trail right at sunrise or maybe even a little bit before. If you do the hike really early in the morning, you'll still get to the arch in the mid-morning, and there won't be anybody up there at all. It'll be great. It'll be peaceful and quiet, and you can enjoy the scenery all to yourself. If you wait until the middle of the day to do it, there will be a horde of people up there. It won't be anywhere near as peaceful or anywhere near as enjoyable. But doing it early in the morning as you're coming down from the hike to get back to your car, you'll see the horde of people coming up the hill, and you'll be like, wow, I'm glad I did this first thing in the morning. I can avoid all these people. But it's still before noon by the time you've already finished the Delicate Arch Trail, and there are other parts of the park that are worth seeing. So the second best part of the park to see is called the Devil's Garden, and that's at the northern end of the park. The Devil's Garden Trail is only about 3 miles, and it's not that difficult, but you will see a ton of arches, and that's what you went to Arches National Park in the first place for. So even if you do Delicate Arch first thing in the morning and then Devil's Garden early afternoon, you will still have the later afternoon to see some of the more popular sites that are just off the road, such as the windows section. So that would be a very long day, but it is a great day. So Arches really is just a one-day national park, but it is a wonderful day you'll be spending there. Next on this list is Yellowstone. You might be surprised because Yellowstone is such an enormous national park. How could it possibly be good for a one-day visit? And yes, it is an enormous national park, and I don't recommend only going there for one day, but if you only have one day, you can still see quite a bit at Yellowstone. But a word of warning, no matter when you go, there is going to be a sea of people there, so don't expect any solitude whatsoever at Yellowstone. It also requires more patience than any other national park I've been because you're going to get stuck in traffic jams at some point. And at some point there'll be a herd of bison crossing the road, slowing traffic up. But sometimes the bison just stand there, kind of like, what are you going to do about it? Run me over? So you might be stuck in traffic. There might be some bears crossing the road or some bears off to the side. People are stopping there. So you're going to spend some time kind of in some traffic and congestion, which is pretty frustrating at a national park, but don't let that deter you because it is a great park to visit, even for just one day. If you do only have one day to visit Yellowstone, I recommend you go to the Norris Geyser Basin part of the park. It's kind of in the middle of the park, but it's a great spot to visit and isn't anywhere near as busy as the Old Faithful Geyser area. It's a pretty easy walk on a boardwalk around the Norris Geyser Basin, and you'll see a lot of geothermal features. You'll see some small geysers, some bubbling mud. It's just pretty cool to see these kind of geothermal features that you're not going to see really anywhere else on Earth. There are several other short hikes and walks you can take where you can just drive your car to the parking lot, walk for less than a mile, check out some pretty cool features, get back in the car, drive to the next trailhead area, walk a mile or so, and just keep doing that several times, and you can get quite a bit out of Yellowstone if you only have one day. Now again, I don't recommend going there for only one day. I recommend going there for 3 or 4 days, but if you do have one day, it's a great spot to visit. You'll see a lot of wildlife, a lot of people too, but it is a great spot. I love Yellowstone. The next park I wanted to mention is just south of Yellowstone, and that's Grand Teton National Park. It sits directly adjacent to Yellowstone, so it's almost like one giant national park that has 2 different administrative units. But even though it sits right next to Yellowstone, the crowds are going to be significantly smaller. It's crazy it can be that close, but the crowds be that much different in size. And the main reason for that is you don't have as many tour buses going that far. So a pretty big chunk of the visitors at a lot of the national parks are going to be those big tour bus crowds, but not as many of them go into Grand Teton for whatever reason, but take advantage of it because the hiking trails will be a lot less busy. And I would assume for most people that are on a road trip or visiting national parks, if you're going to visit Yellowstone, you're also going to visit Grand Teton. So if that's the case, don't plan on doing any serious hiking at Yellowstone. See some of the stuff that's pretty closer to the side of the road, but do your serious hiking at Grand Teton. It'll be a lot less busy. You can get way back into the backcountry much more easily. You can do shorter hikes, not really see anybody at all. When my wife and I did both at the Wyoming National Parks, we were parking in these enormous parking lots at Yellowstone and having to shove people around to get good views. But at Grand Teton, we were able to park right next to the trailhead, hike for a few miles, not see anybody else on the trail, and get back to the car. It was crazy, the night and day experience we had with these 2 national parks. But one word of warning for both of the Wyoming National Parks is that it can be one day, but the weather might change like crazy. The first day we were at Grand Teton, it was wonderful, it was beautiful, temperatures were in the 50s, it was really nice. The next day, not so much, so it can change on a whim, so make sure you're prepared for cold temperatures any day of the year. The next park on this list is Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota, and when most people think of North Dakota, they're not thinking of pretty scenery or national parks, but this park is gorgeous. I've been there 3 times, and each time I've hardly seen anybody there. It's just a very peaceful, very quiet park. In my opinion, the best short hikes at the park are the Jones Creek and the Wind Canyon Trail. So they're only a few miles, they're not very strenuous. The terrain change isn't that great there, so you're not going to be hiking up steep mountains there. It's kind of flat reasonably, so it's not a bad trail, but it is beautiful. You're going to see scenery you don't really expect to see in North Dakota, and scenery you're not going to see anywhere else in the U.S. And as much hiking as I've done at Theodore Roosevelt, I've never seen anybody else on any of the trails I've ever done. We've always had them to ourselves. The last time we were there, we pulled over and my wife was doing yoga and meditating for like 45 minutes just off the road, and not a single car went by the entire time. So that's the kind of peace and quiet you can expect at Theodore Roosevelt. And that's the south unit of the park. The north unit is even less busy. There won't be anybody there. The first time we were there, the only people in the whole north unit of the park were my wife and I and a park ranger. But for me, the best part of Theodore Roosevelt is all the wildlife. You don't really think you're going to see a whole lot in North Dakota, but you really will. There's a lot to see there. But this is a truly great national park. I like how it's underappreciated because that means there aren't that many people there. So it's a great place to visit. Peaceful, quiet, wonderful scenery, great hiking, just a great park for a one-day visit. Next up, I want to talk about Badlands National Park in South Dakota. It's a pretty large national park, but you'll almost certainly only be in the north unit of the park. The south unit is kind of hard to get to, and there really isn't that much to see down there. It's a really nice drive through the park, a lot of good pull-offs. You can take pictures of the scenery and stuff, but just like all the other ones on this list, there are good opportunities for short hikes just off the road. There's a parking area that is the trailhead to 3 of the best hikes in the park, and those are the Window Trail, the Door Trail, and the Notch Trail. And the 3 of those combined are less than 3 miles long. And these are each worth doing. You can see some pretty good Badlands scenery without going very far from your car. Of the 3, I like the Notch Trail the best. And it's not really even a trail. It's just kind of you're scrambling over some exposed rock. And there's a couple of posts here and there to kind of guide you so you don't go too far off. And eventually you'll see a sign that says end of trail. But of course you'll keep going a little bit to look over the cliff there. And some wonderful Badlands scenery. To give you an idea how much you can see in such a short period of time, the last time we were there, we were staying at a motel in Wall, which is a little gateway town outside the park, and It was the last day of our road trip, so my wife was pretty tired. I was pretty tired too, but I didn't want to miss hiking, so I was like, I'm going to go into the park, do some hiking. My wife was like, I'm going to sleep in a little bit. So I went to the park, did all 3 of those short trails, and got back to the hotel before noon. Of course, I don't recommend only spending a few hours at the park, but that's all you have. You can see quite a bit, but you can see even more in an entire day. So it's a great national park for a short visit. The next park on this list is Redwood National Park in the northwestern corner of California. This is pretty far out of the way, so if you're on a cross-country road trip, you're not likely to be going through this part of the country, but Redwood is a great national park for a short visit. A theme for all the national parks in this video is that there's a nice drive you can go through the park, and there's also a handful of nice short trails just off the road, so you don't have to go too far to get to a nice hiking trail, and you don't have to hike for, say, 10 miles to see a lot of the park. Here at Redwood, Highway 101 goes north-south through the park. It's a pretty skinny national park east-west, but it is pretty long north-south. Redwood National Park is known primarily for having the tallest trees in the world, so these are as tall as you're going to ever see on Earth, and there are 2 great spots to see in the park if you're only going to be able to visit for one day. The first is the Lady Bird Johnson Grove, and this is a spot where you can just pull over, do a short hike, and just see some truly wonderful tall trees, and it leads to a spot where there's one particularly huge tree simply called the Big Tree. The other main part of the park to visit is simply called the Tall Trees Grove, and this is exactly how it sounds, and just like the rest of the park, there's a bunch of really tall trees, but this particular part of the park has a lot of the tallest ones kind of clustered together in one small area. But one thing that might be a little bit of a surprise to people is that Redwood National Park is also right along the coast. So as you're driving along the road, you'll have the beach on one side and the redwood trees on the other side. So you can go down to the coastal area. There's a couple of trails right along the coast. It's just really gorgeous. You got these nice, beautiful, scenic type beaches. You're not going to be going out there in your Speedo sunbathing, but these are some really nice coastal areas, some really beautiful beaches to go right up against these gorgeous trees. The next park on the list is the one that I'm the most familiar with of all the national parks in the country, and that's Sequoia Kings Canyon in the Sierra Nevada in Central California. I grew up right near there and have been to the national park many times, and it's a wonderful place to visit. When most people think of national parks in the Sierra Nevada, they're going to think of Yosemite first, which is much more highly visited and much more well known, but Sequoia Kings Canyon is also just as beautiful. Sequoia is most well known for having the largest trees in the world. Whereas Redwood has the tallest trees in the world, Sequoia has the largest trees by volume. Of course, Redwood trees are huge by volume and Sequoia trees are tall, but these are the largest trees in the world. The most popular part of the park to visit is the giant forest area. And this is where you have the General Sherman tree, which is the single largest tree in the entire world. And you also have many other huge sequoias right near there. There are a lot of other parts of the park where you can just go right off the side of the road, do a short little walk or hike and see some other huge trees. The second most popular part of the park is the Grant Grove area in the Kings Canyon section. This is where you have the General Grant tree, which is another huge tree. There's a bunch of other enormous sequoia trees right nearby. And just as how Grand Teton has a lot fewer visitors than Yellowstone, Sequoia Kings Canyon has many fewer visitors than Yosemite, so it's a wonderful, beautiful national park. It's still going to be kind of busy in the summertime, but it's not going to be anywhere near as busy as Yosemite, even though the scenery is just as nice, and it's a wonderful national park for a one-day visit. When most people think of national parks, they're of course going to think of the western U.S. first, but I did want to make special mention of 2 national parks in the eastern half of the U.S. that are great for short visits. The first is Mammoth Cave National Park in central Kentucky, which preserves literally the longest cave in the entire world. There's over 350 miles of known passage. In my opinion, the best way to spend a day at Mammoth Cave is to do a walking tour in the morning. So the tour is where they go to the part of the cave where it's got lights, stairs, handrails, and it's pretty easy to do a short little tour there. They also have a couple of longer ones, but you do get to see some pretty cool cave without having to go way back into it. But if you're more adventurous, in the afternoon, go on a wild cave tour where you go into the back parts of the cave where you'll be crawling, squeezing, climbing up on stuff. The only lights you're going to have are the ones on your helmet. You'll be wearing gloves and knee pads and be getting pretty dirty. And you might be like, oh, hell no, I ain't doing that. But it isn't anywhere near as scary as you might think. So when people think about wild cave tours, they tend to focus on the climbing and the crawling and the squeezing, but that isn't the whole tour, so you will be doing some climbing and crawling, but most of the tour you're going to be walking, including some areas where it's just a huge passage. And even if you absolutely refuse to go on a wild cave tour, I still do think that Mammoth Cave is a great national park to go to for a short visit. you can do a walking tour in the morning and a different one in the afternoon. So you can just go into the parts of the cave with the lights and the stairs and the handrails, but see different parts of the cave because there are multiple walking tours. The vast majority of the population is never going to even set foot inside of a cave. So that's why I think it's wonderful to go to Mammoth Cave, because it is the largest cave in the world and it's right here in the US. And the last national park I'm going to visit on this list is Congaree National Park in central South Carolina. It was originally known as Congaree Swamp National Monument, but when it became a national park, they dropped the word swamp. It's a really easy park to visit for just a short stay. There's a boardwalk that goes around through some of the parts of the park, and it's elevated, so in times when it's flooded, you'll be above the water. And I've been there many times. It's pretty cool to see it when it's in both drought stage and later on when it's in flood stage. You can see just how much the park changes. And because it is basically just walking on a boardwalk, of course, it's not going to be strenuous at all. And there are parts where it goes a little bit lower onto the swamp floor, but you're still on a slight boardwalk or on some dirt, and there's no elevation, so it is a pretty easy walk no matter what part of the park you're going to. The scenery is very unique. It's very different than the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia, or the Everglades in Florida, or the bayous of South Louisiana. So even though they're all technically swamps, they all look a little bit different, and Congaree is very unique. And even though it's only a half an hour from Columbia, which is the capital of South Carolina, it's a very lightly visited national park, and every time I've been there hasn't really been that many people there. So if you are, say, on a vacation to Charleston, I think it is worth the hour or so drive to get up to Congaree National Park. It's a very unique spot. It's an easy national park to get to and to visit, and it's really unique. You're not going to see anything else like it in the US or in the world. So that's my list of the top 10 national parks for a one-day visit. And a lot of the national parks are just too much to see, and one day isn't going to be enough. It can actually be kind of frustrating. So specifically, Yosemite and the Grand Canyon can be really tough for just one day because you're going to just be within the hordes of people and tour buses, and it's kind of hard to see those parks without spending multiple days there and getting back into the backcountry. I hope you found the information in this video useful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and check out my channel for other videos about traveling in the US, cross-country road tripping, nerdy stuff about US geography, comparing parts of the country, ranking different things. So just, nerdy stuff about the US. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King signing out. Similarly, that's a weird word. Similarly to the